The auction yard in Dust Creek smelled of sweat, cattle, and desperation. The kind of place where lives were traded as cheaply as horseshoes. And Luke Maddox, a rancher known more for his silence than his smile, hadn't come looking for anything more than a sack of feed and maybe a new bridle. But fate had a way of shoving men sideways. The crowd pressed in tight around the wooden block as the auctioneer, red-faced and sweating, hollered about the next lot, his voice cracking with disbelief as two handlers dragged out a girl taller and broader than most men, her wrists bound, her dark hair tangled, her face half hidden by dirt, but her eyes sharp as a hawk's, daring anyone to mock her. Too wild to keep, too strong to break, and too much for any decent man's house. The auctioneer spat, banging his gavel on the block as laughter rippled through the crowd. They jeered, called her giant girl. Beast. Better off hauling logs than birthing babies. But she didn't flinch, didn't bow, just stood like a mountain carved from flesh and bone. The bids were half-hearted, thrown more for jest than purchase, until the price fell so low it was an insult, and the auctioneer, desperate to move her along, bellowed, $1. Who'll give me $1 stinking for this trouble? The crowd roared with cruel laughter, but Luke's hand rose slow and steady, the coin glinting in his palm as his voice cut through the noise. I will. Silence fell like a blanket, mouths dropping open as heads swiveled toward the quiet rancher. At the edge of the block, the gavel slammed with a crack, the auctioneer grinning with relief as he barked, Sold! To the fool rancher with more stubbornness than sense. Luke didn't answer the jibes, just stepped forward, his boots crunching in the dust, and met the girl's fierce gaze. She jerked her chin high, daring him to treat her like chattel. But instead he tipped his hat, voice low and calm. Name's Luke Maddox. You ride with me now, but you ain't no prisoner. Works honest, roof's steady. Rest's up to you. For the first time, her defiance faltered, not in defeat, but in confusion. And when the ropes fell away, she followed him, not meek but wary, carrying her own battered trunk as if to remind him she needed no saving. As Luke loaded supplies onto his wagon, the crowd still muttering about his foolishness, he felt it deep in his bones that his life had shifted like a river cut to a new course. And as the giant girl climbed onto the wagon bench beside him, silent as stone, the wide, wild horizon stretched before them, daring them both to see where it might lead. The ride back to Maddox Ranch stretched across miles of dust and sage, the wagon wheels groaning with every rut. And though Luke kept the reins loose in his hands, his eyes flicked sideways more than once to the silent figure seated beside him, her long legs cramped on the bench, her back rigid, her jaw set like stone. She hadn't offered her name, and he hadn't pressed, knowing a wild creature bolted faster when cornered. But when they reached the ranch yard at dusk and Jacob, his small boy with a mop of sandy hair, ran out from the porch clutching his wooden horse, it was the girl who froze first, her wild eyes narrowing as if the child's laughter were foreign. This is home, Luke said simply, swinging down to unyoke the team. But before he could lift the trunk, she hefted it herself, muscles rippling under her plain dresses, though the heavy load were nothing more than a bucket of water. Jacob stared wide-eyed, whispering, she's strong. Pa, and Luke caught the faintest twitch of pride flicker across her face before it vanished behind her mask. She slept in the barn that first night, curled in straw by the horses as though their steady breath soothed her, and Luke let her be. Saying nothing, though, Jacob asked why she wouldn't come inside. At dawn she was already working, mending fences with raw hands, hauling pails from the well, her silence louder than words, and though Luke offered coffee and biscuits, she only nodded once in thanks, eating apart as though proximity might chain her. Yet over days something shifted. Jacob shadowed her steps, fascinated, chattering about calves and coyotes, and one afternoon when he tripped carrying kindling, it was she who caught him before he hit the dirt, her huge hand gentle against his small back. Thank you, ma'am, he whispered, and though she didn't answer, her grip lingered a heartbeat longer than needed. That night, while Luke fixed a saddle under lamplight, she appeared at the door, holding a piece of wood she had whittled rough but clear into the shape of a horse, leaving it on the table without a word before vanishing again. Luke turned the carving over in his palm, his chest tightening with something he hadn't felt in years, a quiet hope that this girl wasn't just passing through but rooting herself in ways she didn't yet see. By the week's end she had spoken at last, her voice husky and uncertain. When Luke asked what to call her, Mara, she said, and the name hung in the air like a truth long hidden. After that, the ranch no longer felt the same. She rode with Luke at dawn, her long frame straight in the saddle, handling the stock with uncanny instinct. And when Jacob laughed at her first attempt to milk a cow, she narrowed her eyes before bursting into a laugh herself. Rough and awkward, but real. Word spread fast in town that Maddox's dollar girl was stronger than any ranch hand, and tongues wagged that he'd lost his senses, keeping her around. Feeding her, trusting her. Men joked she was too wild to be a wife. Too big for a home, but Luke didn't listen, for he had seen the way she laid a blanket over Jacob when the boy fell asleep by the fire, the way her rough hands could be as gentle as rain. Still, shadows lingered in Mara's eyes, and one night as coyotes howled in the distance, she said softly, "They'll come for me. Men always do." Luke's gaze didn't waver as he answered, "Not while I draw breath." And though she scoffed, turning away, he saw her shoulders ease, just slightly, as though a burden she had carried alone for too long had finally been set down. Spring storms rolled over the plains in dark waves, rattling the barn roof and filling the gullies with sudden rivers. And it was during one such storm that the past Mara feared most came riding into the Maddox ranch yard. 5 men on dust-caked horses with eyes sharp as knives, their leader bent and towering in the saddle, scarred jaw set in a grin that promised nothing good. Luke stepped out on the porch, shotgun resting easy in his hands, Jacob peeking from behind his legs. But it was Mara who stiffened in the shadows of the barn door, her wild eyes flashing like a cornered wolf's. "We come for what's ours," Benton drawled, spitting into the mud, his gaze sliding toward her with a possessive hunger that turned Luke's stomach. "That girl's been trouble since birth. Too strong for her own good. She's worth coin, and I aim to take her back." Mara's breath came fast, hands curling into fists, and Luke could see it, every instinct in her screaming to bolt, to fight, to never trust again. But before she could move, he stepped forward, voice like iron. "She ain't yours. Not today, not ever. She works here, she lives here, and she'll decide her own fate." Benton laughed, low and cruel, the sound grating against the storm's thunder, and his men dismounted, circling like wolves scenting blood. Jacob whimpered, clutching his wooden horse, and in that moment Mara snapped, not with fear but with a feral protectiveness, striding into the rain, towering, shoulders squared, her voice ringing out for the first time with unshakable fury. "I'm not your property. You sold me like cattle. But this man paid for me with something you'll never understand. Respect." Her words cracked like lightning, and for the first time Benton faltered, though his pride burned too hot to back down. The men lunged, fists and boots flying, and Luke fired a warning shot, scattering them long enough for Mara to seize a post from the barnyard fence, swinging it like a weapon with strength that shocked even her. The brawl was brutal, mud splattering, rain soaking every blow. But side by side, Luke and Mara stood, his steady aim and her raw power weaving together like threads of the same rope. When it ended, Benton lay groaning in the muck, his men crawling back to their saddles, muttering curses they dared not fulfill. "This ain't over," Benton spat, clutching his ribs as he mounted. But his bravado rang hollow against the sight of Mara standing tall, chest heaving, rain streaking her face, Luke beside her like a wall of granite. As the riders vanished into the storm, silence fell heavy, broken only by Jacob's small voice. "Pa, she saved us." Luke turned, meeting Mara's gaze, and in it he saw not just the wildness but the loyalty, the fire of someone who had finally chosen where she belonged. She trembled, not from fear but from the flood of freedom crashing through her. And when Luke placed a hand on her shoulder, steady and sure, she didn't flinch this time. Instead, she whispered so soft he almost missed it, "I don't want to run anymore." The words, fragile and fierce all at once, sealed something unspoken between them. And though the storm still raged across the land, inside that ranch yard a bond, stronger than iron, had been forged. The days after the storm passed slower, calmer, though the air still carried the echo of Benton's threat like distant thunder over the plains. And yet something within the Maddox ranch had changed forever. For Mara no longer drifted like a shadow on the edges of life, but instead moved with purpose, as if every nail she hammered, every calf she roped, every meal she awkwardly shared by the fire was laying down roots deeper than she had ever dared dream. Jacob followed her with unshakable faith, sitting tall when she taught him how to ride bareback on the old mare, laughing when she lifted him high into the air like he weighed nothing. And in those moments, Luke often caught himself standing still, watching with a quiet awe that filled his chest with warmth stronger than any whiskey. One evening, as the sky burned orange and purple, he saddled 2 horses without a word and simply gestured for her to follow, riding out past the creek and into the open land where the horizon seemed endless. They rode side by side for miles, neither speaking, until Luke finally broke the silence, his voice low and steady. "Mara, I didn't buy you that day in town. I freed you, but I reckon somewhere along the way, you freed me too." She turned, startled, her wild eyes softening, and for the first time there was no wall, no mask, just the bare soul of a woman who had carried pain too long. Her voice cracked but held firm as she answered, "All my life I thought strength meant fighting alone. But here, with you, with Jacob, I learned strength can mean staying." The truth of her words hung between them like sacred fire, and Luke, never a man of fancy speeches, reached across the saddle to take her hand, rough calloused fingers tangling with hers. She didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned closer, their horses stepping in rhythm until the space between them disappeared. And when he kissed her, it was not the desperate claim of a man proving ownership, but the steady, reverent promise of a partner who had found his equal. From that night on, the ranch thrived under their shared hands, her raw strength and his steady wisdom, blending into something neither could have built alone. And though neighbors whispered of the giant girl tamed by $1, the truth ran deeper. She was never tamed, only seen, only loved for exactly who she was. When Benton's name came up again in town, Luke no longer worried, because he knew Mara would face him without fear, and more importantly, she would never face him alone. On the porch one quiet evening, Jacob asked with childlike innocence, "Pa, is she my ma now?" And Mara, caught off guard, felt tears sting her eyes as Luke wrapped an arm around her shoulders, answering, "She's family. Son, ours." And with that, the last chains of her old life shattered, leaving only freedom, love, and the wide, wild west stretching out before them.